Hello, everybody out there.
Hello.
Welcome to the tall and the short of it with
Betsy
and Jenny. It has been a day. I tell you what, I have been doing a speech therapist search, which is a struggle. And because there's so many openings in Indiana right now and not enough speech therapists to take them all. So I lucked out and I got a candidate that actually I've interviewed 2 candidates this week, which is crazy. So super excited about that. I'm hoping that one of them will come work for us next year because we're going to lose one of ours, which we love.
Kristen, I think she likes them as well. Our current, one of our speech therapists.
One of our speech therapists for sure. Yeah.
Spoke highly of them.
Yes, so that's a good thing for this week. But our topic for today is kind of controversial, but that's never stopped us before. We want to talk about something that comes up at the end of a school year, which is retention. And I get asked a lot of questions about retention as a school administrator. People want to know my opinion about it, and others wanting to know if I think it works or if I don't think it works and those kinds of things. So I figured we would just put it out there what the research says about retention today, and then if people have more questions, they can jump in and join the conversation, right?
Well, and it's one of those, it's not just like when people say, what do you think? It's not just like, we're not just saying this. It's
right.
Like this is...
Yeah,
our opinions on this are not just like random.
No,
it's research based,
and I think most people base their thoughts on retention on specific narratives. Like, I knew this kid who was retained, or my son was retained and this happened. You know, instead of like retention in general and what research has been done on that, and overall typically what happens when kids are retained. There's always going to be exceptions to everything. But, so we're going to look at that. So, Betsy, why do some teachers choose to retain kids? Like, what is going through their mind when they're trying to make that decision?
I would say a lot of them, in my opinion, would look at it as if they were the next grade level teacher, and what they would like, is this what would I think if this child came into my classroom? Are they ready for,
like, the expectations?
Yeah, the expectations, and that's both academically. Are they academically, where are they with their academic skills? Where are they, like, in comparison to what that expectation was? And just know that that expectation varies from school to school.
Yes.
So that is also kind of a tough thing, because we get kids that move in and the expectation was different from the previous school, and then parents are hearing, maybe us say they're behind, and they're like, we haven't heard that before. Well, it's because our expectations are different.
And it not only varies school to school, but state to state, depending on what their state standards are.
So, but I mean, you can literally just drive down the road, go from one school like to the next one, and I don't know why my necklace is bothering me so much, but it is. It's not
I should have worn mine today.
But anyway, so it's a lot. And then also, especially in the younger grades, just maturity, kind of like social skills and those kinds of things, especially during that kindergarten year. How are those social skills? How are they with just the other things that have to do with school that aren't academics?
Right. So they're trying to determine when they make a retention decision whether or not they think that child would benefit from that, right? And in reality, what usually happens is that depending on the school, again, they might have quite a few kids that are struggling, and depending on socioeconomic status, things like that. And they may be like, I can't retain a lot of kids. Right. So how do I choose, right? So now they're weighing, you know, which kids do they think would benefit most from retention and which kids will go on.
Right.
And so I think that then becomes very subjective at that point. So we want to, a lot of times they'll turn to like a retention scale or something like that to try to be less subjective about it. I know one out there that exists is called the Lights Retention Scale that some schools use and they fill this out about the child to see whether or not that would be beneficial according to this specific scale.
I've never actually seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Have you?
I've seen it, yes.
Not something I use.
Right. So now let's dive into what the research actually says about retention. So we're going to share some statistics that are kind of, you know, like, whoa, like a little bit shocking.
I'm sorry, my allergies are a mess again today.
Yeah.
So it's...
Yeah, it's bad out there.
So I'm drinking, I'm coughing. Drinking water. I'm
yes.
sorry, I'm drinking water.
Not that kind of drinking, yeah. So there are a lot of kids retained every year in the United States, 2.5 million.
I don't know that I would have guessed it to be that high.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would have guessed. I just don't think I would have guessed it to be quite that high.
Yeah, 2.5 million kids being retained. And
hang on, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't tell me when we were doing it. Did it break it down to like grade level?
It didn't. That was in that particular
I mean, I'm
study.
guessing kindergarten's the highest, and
I would guess.
Veers off. I mean, I would say probably
Yeah.
once you've hit third grade, you've probably
right. Fewer grade
pretty
retentions
maxed
in
out.
the upper grades for sure.
But-
They're not non-existent. I will say that in a lot of the studies, there were kids that were being retained up through 8th grade, which that just gets really bad.
Wow.
So we won't go there
that
yet.
takes us completely back to where we talked about trauma.
Exactly.
That's it.
So the statistic that goes with the 2.5 million retention, though, is the one that made me go, whoa. Because we're always talking about how we need more funding in education and we need, we don't want to overspend or we need to be more frugal and we need to find ways to spend the money more efficiently. We actually spend $14 billion every year paying for the kids who are retained having that extra year of school. So that in and of itself is just a gigantic number that taxpayers may not realize. That $14 billion of what we put out, that's actually more than what the federal government pays for special education. So would you, just to put that in perspective, the federal government gave us $12.5 million last year. But we spend $14 billion retaining kids. Okay, so just want to throw that out there.
As we're talking about this, more questions are coming up. Like, as we're going to talk about intervention, I would be interested to know how much money is spent providing interventions.
Mm-hmm. And that number in and of itself is not for intervention. It's not for any special programming for those kids. That's just because we retain them, we will have to spend this much more for them to have that extra year of school.
Yeah. But I would be interested to know that.
Okay, so let's start there. The studies also have, like, as you look at them, and there's been studies done for the last 100 years on retention. Okay, so 100 years they've been studying this. That the single most powerful indicator of high school dropout is that they were retained. Yikes. Okay, so why would that be? Why would a retention make someone more likely to drop out of school? So let's analyze that for a second.
Well, like I just said, it also, I think it depends on, not that it can't affect them in all grade levels. I also think it depends on when it occurred.
Mm-hmm.
But we were also discussing that there's a lot of trauma in it. I mean, that seems like a harsh word to put with with this. You know, that just seems like a harsh word to say with this, but it is. It can, and younger kids don't have the, I'm going to use the word tools, but they don't have, when I say that, I mean they don't have the language. They don't have, and obviously if they're already struggling, they don't have those skills to voice why, like how they feel about it and what's happening, and this is, I'm confused, and so so you're putting on something they don't understand when they're already struggling and they can't express themselves, chances are, at the younger level. So those, I mean, that's one.
Yeah.
So one way I guess I look at it, or some of my, I'm sorry, I'm hitting the table.
No. So let's say we've retained this child in, let's say, first grade. They've been retained in first grade. So now they're a year older than their peers. Well, that continues all the way through school, that they're a year older than their peers. And that means they hit adolescence sooner. They hit a lot of those emotional, you know, that all of that stuff that goes around with the chromosomal craziness. And chromosomal, that's not what I meant.
No.
What's the word?
Hormonal.
Hormonal. Oh my gosh, funny. So, hormonal craziness hits
I shook
them.
my head.
Right. You didn't
By
stop
the way,
me.
we have 8 days left.
I
Can
know,
you tell?
8 days, yes.
Can you tell?
So
I may be struggling a little.
and then when they get to high school, they turn 18 their junior year instead of their senior year. So if I'm a kid who struggles and I've turned 18 in sometime during my junior year, I'm my own guardian now. I can sign myself out anytime I want if I don't want to be here anymore.
I think because I was 18 my entire senior year. I turned 18 in September. But I think I would say, I would assume, I have to assume because I don't know, that a child that has struggled, they're going to look at it obviously differently. At that time I was like, no, parents still take care of me. You do. You pay the bills, do all that. But, you know, just because someone, you're like, oh, well, there's a lot of kids that turn 18 early. Because I wasn't the oldest one. There was a lot of people that were older than me in my class. And I turned 18 the beginning of September. But I think it's just when you're struggling and you're kind of looking like, how do I make this stop? How do I make this?
Like I turned 18 in my senior year too, in November. And so I was 18 more than a semester. But I didn't struggle in school. And I had friends. And I was in sports, and I did all those things that make you want to be there and finish. Whereas a lot of times kids who've been retained don't find those same successes. So, and then if they've been retained twice, wow, that jumps the dropout rate even up more. I think they said they're 10 to 12 times more likely to drop out of high school if they've been retained twice. So just know that it's huge.
And she did not look this up. I just know that there are other, like, then if you look at what the correlation is with dropping out to other, like, negative things happening, that, I mean, so while I wouldn't necessarily say retention leads to, like, bad life choices itself, dropping out does. So in a sense that correlation just continues.
It all is a ripple effect, for sure. So the other thing I looked at was there a correlation between someone who is retained and them actually having higher achievement? And there wasn't. It was unequivocal that there was no studies that showed those kids caught up with their same age peers.
A lot of times, like, you'll see them the next year is better. They are more successful that next year, or possibly. And I would guess this would happen at the younger grades. I can't imagine being retained in 8th grade and then going in like your 8th grade. You know, might be better the next 8th grade year, but then after that, I can't imagine like hopping into your freshman year going, oh, you know,
I'm great now.
This is. Geometry is fantastic, no problem, or whatever you start taking. But that they don't, I don't know if this was here on the next page, but it doesn't, you might see that for a year or two.
You see a short-term gain, and then it all plateaus. Yeah. Absolutely. And there's no evidence that kids who are retained do any better on standardized testing than the struggling ones that were promoted or assigned. So whether they're retained or assigned, to standardized testing shows no difference whatsoever. So now, why would we not want to retain a kid? Like, it's all of the teacher's instincts to want to keep them and work on those things one more year and just repeat the same thing.
And as a teacher, our job is to help kids learn.
Right.
That's our job. And our goal is always to be successful. Like, we're not like, oh, we are never happy with, like, 90% of my class or 80, are learned what they needed to this year. So that's okay. No, it's individually. You look at it completely individually.
Right.
So it is I completely understand the need to be like,
right.
No, let's
give them a do-over, right?
Right.
It's not like a mulligan in golf.
Yeah.
Because doing the same thing you did before is not going to, in and of itself, fix the problem.
Right.
But what usually, the positives of going ahead and assigning those struggling kids to the next grade level, even though it seems counterintuitive, is that now the gap is enough that they're going to get help. Because unfortunately in education, which is, how the law works, is that until the gap is big enough, you can't get the services you need. So retaining them keeps them from being able to identify,
because they are compared to their grade level.
Exactly.
Not they're compared. So when the expectation is, if it's a kindergartner and their expectation, at the end of their first kindergarten year, it's when they are retained, then they go back
to your expected to know nothing.
Yeah. So that
Exactly.
expectation, and so
because you can't judge a kid based on content they've never been exposed to.
Yeah.
So when we decide to move a struggling kindergartner on to first grade, it's so that the gap is big enough that they can receive the interventions they need. Or if they do need special education testing, it's going to show up as a true disability for them. But if they stay in kindergarten and we have to do testing based on grade level standards and grade level norms, they're not going to qualify, because kindergarten norms for standardized tests are that they're supposed to know nothing.
Right.
So that's why you can't. It doesn't work that way.
It's even hard to identify a kindergarten student during their first year of kindergarten with specific disabilities, just because it's
right. Unless it's an obvious one,
unless it's probably a cognitive disability
or autism that's pretty glaring,
but even looking at ADHD, which is because they're
that's hard.
5, they're 6,
they're supposed to move around and
that.
have a hard time sitting for long periods and paying attention.
Or learning disability. Exactly. I don't think I'm just going to say, in our experience, I don't think we've ever done testing and found a kindergartner to have a learning disability.
No.
And we're not saying they don't.
We're saying that won't show up in testing.
We have to have the data to prove it in order to,
right. So, like I said, most of the time, and again, it's unfortunate that if they are going to qualify for special education, that gap has to be big enough, and they have to show they're not making educational progress. So, you got to let them go on so you can get them the services they need. And that's just reality. It's just reality.
Actually had that. No, I didn't have that same conversation, but it was discussed that, today. literally today.
And the thing is that the few studies out there that have shown positive results from retention, the ones I read were like, there was one based out of Florida after they passed the law that you had to stay in third grade if you didn't pass their third grade reading test. Well, what they neglected to mention was that the other part of the law stated that when you were retained in the third grade, you had to be given a highly effective teacher for the next year, and you had an additional 90 minutes of intervention every single day on top of your typical instruction. So, I'm sorry, but why didn't they do that the first time in third grade so they didn't have to retain them?
Where are they finding the additional 90 minutes in a school day is what I'm wanting to know. But anyways.
Yeah, what were they missing?
Yeah.
Because that's my question, too.
That's
what
a
was
lot
happening?
of time. I mean, we struggle sometimes to come up with.
Right. So I don't believe it was the retention that actually made them do better. It was that extra 90 minutes a day of intervention with a highly effective teacher.
Yeah.
So just throwing that out there, that's not really something they factored in to that study. So just like I say, you got to read them. You can't just go by, hey, this one says that it's great. You got to read what it says. Anyway, so what do you do? Like when you're faced with that, you get that letter from your child's teacher that says your child could be retained this year if they don't start improving. The dreaded retention letter. My first thought would be to get in there and talk to that teacher and find out what the problem is and what interventions can be put in place right away.
That's the key word right there, what interventions. Asking what interventions have been done, what things that...
You don't want to wait on that. You want to know what interventions are we trying if he's behind. Phone call there. Forgot to put it on Do Not Disturb.
Yeah, but asking what those are. What does that look like? We could do a whole thing on interventions.
Maybe we should at some point.
Yeah.
But knowing what interventions are happening and what interventions could be happening if they're not to keep this from occurring.
And is it working? How long has it been going on? And
exactly. Yeah. And some schools will leave it up to the parents whether or not their child gets ultimately retained. And if that's the case, you can tell them the research says that it doesn't help. So we should move on.
Also, you need to be if that's the case, then you also have to be an advocate for that, again, that intervention piece.
Absolutely.
Because promotion without intervention isn't going to...
No.
It's not just the promotion piece. It's the promotion
right.
with the intervention.
Absolutely. And have them get very specific about what is the barrier that's keeping my child from moving forward and growing, and how can we tackle that. And I know some parents will do outside tutoring, things like that on top of it, and I'm saying that they can get that in school. It just has to be, you have to be the advocate for what that child needs. Also, you can look into summer programming. I know we did a whole thing last week about, things you could do in the summer with your child to help them. But if they're really struggling, there might be something that they need to do in the summer to help with a deficit.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be something not fun.
Well, that's why again, during that conversation, the parent asked about what to do, what could be done over the summer, and I gave them ideas, but then I also said, I'll send some things home, because honestly, like, we talk about it being fun. That, yes, it's easier to get your kids to do things when they're like that, but movement, we could talk about research again. Movement, research shows that movement helps move information from short-term to long-term memory. Yep. So when they are playing and moving around as part of that, a lot of times people struggle with that being like schoolwork. But actually it is more beneficial often than like a worksheet.
Yes.
Which is why when you come into my room you don't see a lot of worksheets. But sorry, I was looking to see if I even actually I kind of sort of see one over there. So one. But
only because it's hard to teach time without clock faces.
Yeah, that's true. That's what it is. It is a time one, and I kept it for date, and it was kind of a data collection thing. But so anyways, but that's something to note that serves a purpose. It actually helps move that information, and especially with the younger kids who are probably where most retention happens. You're going to get better. I mean, they're going to want to move for you more than...
And also something else that's outside of retention research, but just developmental research, child development research, shows that kids develop at different rates between the ages of 5 and 8. And sometimes you'll have a kid who's just not getting it in kindergarten, but they go to first grade and then something clicks. And now all of a sudden they're doing it. And there's no explanation other than the fact that their brain was just developmentally ready for it now. And so you have to know
that
same
way kids are potty trained at different ages. Kids ride bikes at different ages. Kids,
absolutely.
Everybody does things at different ages.
We talk at different ages. Freak out though if their kids don't meet those.
We walk
kindergartners should be at this level at the end, and that's not necessarily true.
If you just think about that, there's everybody. I mean, just all skills in general are at. We do it at different times.
It's normal for kids to develop at different rates when they're in that early childhood area. So that is our take on it. And like I said, we talk grounded in science. We don't like to just say this is our opinion. We have an opinion based on science. So that's what we do. All right. Hi, Jen.
Yeah, we haven't talked about this, but something we do kind of need to discuss and maybe start thinking about, because we only have 8 days left, is our typical time is not going to work this summer because I am not available during that time.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm a teacher. I have a summer job.
Yeah.
So we need to kind of discuss, do we do later? Do we do a weekend? I have Mondays off, sometime on Monday. So that's something.
Mondays works for me.
However, that's also could be my lake day.
True.
So anyways.
Do you have good Wi-Fi up there?
Yeah, it's down on.
You go live from the boat?
It's down on Geist. Of course they have Wi-Fi there.
Yeah.
Or it's, sorry, I used to go up north.
Sorry, not the
I used to go up north.
The down lake.
No, I did not. I used to go up there. But anyway, not always on Monday. I'm just saying that we just need to rethink about when we're going live.
Okay.
This summer, and so throwing it out there, that's something to put out there. I don't know.
Like if anybody else has a preference, throw it into the comments, and we'll take that into consideration.
So,
maybe.
Anyways,
I don't know, maybe Sunday evenings would work better. Or, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. And maybe, like we said, maybe we do a poll and see what people think, or I don't know.
We can do a poll. I like that idea.
I just knew we would. Let me put it this way: if we go live on Thursdays between like 3 and 3:30, my nephews will be with me, and it won't be quiet.
They'll be like,
Yeah. So.
All right. Well, that is it for the tall and the short of it today. Don't forget to
join the conversation.
All right. Bye, guys.